Hi, I'm Michelle.
Hi, I'm Tara.
Welcome back to our podcast, Books and Beyond with Bound. This is our quarantine edition, and we spoke to another talented writer this week, Tara Kaushal. She is the author of Why Men Rape. We loved the book because we haven't read anything like it before. She went through rigorous research over 7 years. She went undercover to interview men and find out why they have raped. I mean, it is a mind blowing book with so much of insights, so many interesting stories. I think you would have never read something like it before. So, Tara and I have always been interested in investigative journalism, and we wanted to know how Tara did it. So, she shared her research process with us. What was it like while she was researching on the field? Sitting so close to these dangerous men. Then, what was it like actually writing the book, and what is it like now after having published it? What is the reception like? Who is the ideal audience for the book, and what kind of feedback she has been getting? So, we have spoken about that and so much more. So, please be aware that we have covered sensitive topics in this episode like rape, other forms of sexual assault, child abuse, and trauma. So please do exercise caution when you are listening to it because it can be triggering for some listeners. But otherwise, it is a very informative and educative episode, and hopefully, you will learn something from it the way we did. So let's dive in. Hi, Tara. Welcome to our podcast.
Thanks, Michelle, and thank you, Tara, also for having me.
Hi, Tara. My namesake. Welcome. So, Michelle and I both read your book, and we thought it was so relevant. It was so unique, and we really appreciated that you wrote something like this. I don't think anything like this has been written before.
Who did you really write the book for? I mean, did you have a particular audience in mind? Because, Tara and I, while we were reading the book, we were wondering, so, maybe open minded people like us would pick up the book anyway, because we are curious. And some, some narrow minded people that we know might just not pick up the book. So, like, did you have a particular audience in mind?
Absolutely. See, part of me also realizes that the first round of readership would be, preaching to the choir, so to speak, right? Liberal, interested in gender, who already kind of knew what they were searching for or already know that the onus lies with the men. But the book is much larger than my own social circle or my own perspectives or perception of the audience that I wrote it for. And I'm actually really surprised to find the kind of people that are reaching out to me on Instagram primarily and on Facebook also, but mostly on Instagram to tell me that they're reading the book, to tell me that, that they found the book interesting. And this includes this one guy who has been trolling me on Facebook and on Twitter, while also sending me friend requests on Facebook and Instagram.
That's so scary. My God. My God.
That's confusing. What is it trying to do?
He writes me poetry on Facebook and sends me friend requests. Then he trolls me in public and then finally he's reading the book. Clearly, he's a misogynist. He's an MRA, and that was pretty obvious. That's why we started this dialogue on Facebook, in public on Facebook and on Twitter. He's out to disprove me. But he's reading the book and writing me messages saying, I find it actually very interesting. So the book is larger than me. And that was eventually the hope, right? So I have realized that I no longer want to engage or can engage with the completely right wing, the completely traditional people. Like if you're 100% right wing, if you're a buck, I'm not out to change your mind. I used to have a one idiot at a time policy, but I felt that the amount of energy I was wasting trying to get someone to just accept the basics about human rights and everything was just wasted effort. So I felt that it was easier to take someone who's on the spectrum and push them further into thinking about to thinking more deeply about gender and women's rights and men's responsibility in women's rights. I think in person, I no longer engage, because if you want to ask me, if you're a feminist and you want me to explain to you why it's wrong to be a TERF, or if you want to talk about like evolved understanding of feminism or human rights or cultural liberalism, I'm happy to go that journey with you. But I'm not interested in teaching you ABCs, man. That's not my space. I don't have the patience. But for people who are looking at my book and learning ABCs through it, I'm very happy that that's happening as well. It's like putting 5,000 babies out into the world and letting them have their own lives and journeys.
But I'm glad to hear that, yes, it has gone, beyond those echo chambers that we often find ourselves in. And I also saw, you had posted something about the Hindu, and they had a very different opinion of the book than a lot of others. And I like the fact that you were very accepting of their criticism, their reviews. You accept everybody will have a different reaction to the book.
Everybody who had read the book before it was published was all praised for it. And I had spoken to everyone from a senior journalist to a senior gender researcher, economist, psychologist, anthropologist, sociologist. So these were all people who were part of shaping the book towards the end. And everyone was really happy with the book. There was all praise coming from all quarters. And so it wasn't until 1 or 2 days before the launch that it actually struck me that, all this while I'm just obsessed with the launch and excited for it. But what if the book is absolute crap and everyone hates it? And Sahil was like, look, I mean, that's also an option, but going this far, you know that everyone who's read it actually really enjoys it. So chill out. And I did. And I think all of the research, all of the reviews, all of the numbers for the book has sold more than we were expecting it to, for sure. Because I didn't write a bestseller, right? I wrote some complex social, psychological, anthropological book that is not a mass book. But then I also, I kind of got used to the praise. I got used to, the 40 messages in my inbox every day saying, I love your book and thank you and stuff like that. So when the Hindu came out, I have to say it took me a moment. I'm like, oh, fuck, she hates it. But I realized that she didn't. She just said that all of the stuff that I set out to do from a stylistic perspective, to make it casual and to make the important interesting, so to speak, was stuff that she didn't like. And I think that's a generational lens. And she admits as such at the end. She said, the reviewer says, maybe the stuff that I didn't like about this book style is what makes it a perfect millennial read. And I was looking at making this a millennial read. So I guess I did achieve what I had set out to do. But of course, some people are going to not want that. And that's also okay. And I was quite amused by it.
I mean, there is freedom of speech, right? Of course, I'm not commenting about this particular review, but I meant like sometimes I think a critique helps a writer much more than a raving review.
It did allow me to realize that, because the book is mass exclusive, which means there's something for everyone, but also means that there's something missing for everyone, right? So I've got people saying, I love the book, but there was too much cast, or I love the book, but there was too little cast, or there was not enough theory, or there was too much theory, or there was not enough story, or there was too much story. So I expected that. I just hadn't looked at a generational lens.
So can you tell us a little bit about, why you set out to write this book?
This book is the culmination of a really long personal and professional journey. And I think it actually started when I was 12 years old. Although I was raped as a 4-year-old or 5-year-old or 6-year, something really young by my gardener, because my parents didn't know about it, there were absolutely no consequences on my life and my freedoms and my lifestyle. But when we moved, when I was 12, from naval bases, which are considered safe, to Noida as civilians, suddenly my parents were really preoccupied with my hemlines and my deadlines and where I was going. And I would get flashed at on my way to school, and I nearly got abducted. And I think the question that I started asking then as a 12-year-old baby feminist, why do the actions of men impact my life so much? And why can't they stop? And why must I change? Um, I think that's resulted in this book that people have read 25 years later. Um, so that was the basic germ. I think the 2012 Delhi gang rape was the big catalyst for me. I was a college student who traveled to Delhi University by bus 10 years before. So it just felt like it hit really close to home. And also that nothing seemed to have changed, right? This was the same thing that had been happening for centuries. And why did it continue to happen? So I think the Delhi gang rape kind of made me say that this is the book I'm finally going to write. And I took 4 years reading about it and planning for it, and finally started working on it full time in 2017.
Thank you for sharing that, Tara. We really found the title of the book very intriguing because we often hear, why do women get raped? It's always the onus is on the women, but your book changes the game. So, how did you conceive that title?
I think that is the essential problem, right? That we are always putting the onus on what was she doing, where was she going, who was she with, was she drunk? And the onus is entirely on the wrong person, on the wrong gender. If somebody got stabbed, the first reaction would be to blame the perpetrator. But when it comes to getting raped, it's always the woman's fault. And we're in the 21st century. I think this was time that it changed. And for me, putting the onus back where it belonged on the men was step one. So initially, the book was called "Why Indian Men Rape," and that was what the project as well was called, not only the book. But it changed form over time, and it's now called "Why Men Rape: An Indian Undercover Investigation." That was it for me. If people engage with nothing more than the title of my book, and they just deal with the title, which is putting the onus back on the men, that's more than enough. And in order to solve a problem, you have to understand it first. So that's what I've tried to do. First, put the onus back on the right gender and on the perpetrators, and then further understood what perpetrators do and why they do it in order to change this entire scenario.
And your research process was very interesting, Tara. And when I read the book, I was so intrigued by your research process, because you went undercover and you interviewed 9 of these perpetrators. I can't imagine what was going on in your head, and you seemed so objective when you were putting all of this information across. How did you firstly choose these subjects? And then I also want to ask, what was it like?
So the decision to go undercover was fairly elemental. So I wanted to study these men. I wanted to do it in real life. I wanted to meet these people. And I wanted to not do it within the prison system, because I feel that the prison system gives a wrong understanding of men who rape. Okay, so first it promotes the Shakti Kapoor idea of rapist, because only a certain kind of person has the law lean on them heaviest. So I didn't want that. Also, I think that the prison system removes an understanding of men in their social environment. People are not islands. So meeting these men in the prison system would have just defeated the purpose. So I didn't want to do that. But then imagine the conversation where I call a guy and say, hey, I know you're not convicted. I know there's no case against you, but I believe you're a rapist. So will you talk to me? I think that conversation was not going to go very well. Further, I was concerned of what is called a social desirability bias, which is the human tendency to tell people what you think they want to hear. So if I told somebody that, look, I'm researching rape in order to stop it, um, odds are they would either tell me what I wanted to hear, which is that they believed that women um, shouldn't be raped or whatever, which is the politically correct answer, of course. Or that they would maybe overstate their actions to seem more dabang and more carefree and stuff like that, right? So I was very clear that I had to go undercover. The first thing I did was start speaking to women on my Facebook. But what I soon realized, and I'd already kind of had a sense about it, is that gender violence follows class lines. So the kind of men who raped the kind of women who were on my Facebook were people like us. And as much as I didn't want to promote the Shakti Kapoor idea of rapist, these Me Too type of men are not representative of India either. So I chose two of these kinds of men. And then, in order to represent men across social class in India, I also went to the police, went to local media, local NGOs, detective agencies, local contacts, and finally found these 9 men. When I set out to do this, I was fairly cash about it. Yeah, I don't know whether this comes from being a naval officer's daughter or whatever, but it was work. Like, this is how I'm writing this book. And so I have to meet men who have raped, so I'm going to do this. And while I was with them as well, I had a lot of adrenaline. I was in character. So there was a distinction between me, Tara Kaushal, the horrified and terrified person, and, this character that I was playing of this researcher, this movie researcher that was saying, or phir kya hua? Or phir? Or batao? So it was a very unusual experience. I think my spouse, Sahil, sitting at home watching me on my WhatsApp live location was more stressed out than I was. When I had time to process what had gone down, there was clearly a lot of trauma there. And it's something that I'm still dealing with. For instance, last year, I was fast asleep and I was having this really vivid dream, and I ended up biting my spouse really badly. So I have been cuddling him in the crook of his arm, and some people were chasing me, and I have bitten him. And there are
Oh
times
my.
where I've been screaming, "Stop molesting me," and all to him in my sleep. So there is obviously trauma, vicarious trauma, other people's trauma, other women's trauma, as well as my own, which is obviously coming to the fore. So it happened twice during the project.
My God.
Yes, I am in therapy, and it's 13 years now. And yes, I think I have to deal with all of this, but I think it was worth it.
One thing I would like to say is a lot of women do not, pursue investigative journalism for this very reason. They think that they are not cut out for it, or but the way you, I would say, have handled it, but I mean, we are all human. No matter what experience we go through, the after effects will be there. But I really think that the way you have pulled it off, like especially in the book, is commendable, Tara. So thank you for going out there and writing a book that nobody has had the
Yeah.
guts to write
I
so
mean,
far.
none of what you're saying, and I can't imagine what you went through, even while talking to these men, and then as you said, in the aftermath. But yeah, as Michelle said, it's sort of like a sociological and anthropological study that you've done. So it's so unbiased in your reportage, which is amazing. And both of us, when we were reading, we were like, how did she do this? Because I know that if I had to interact with such people, there would be so much anger that would come out.
Yeah, same here. Like I would have picked up a glass and probably hurled it at somebody. I'm very short tempered that way, but yes, I mean, you even in your writing, you appeared so calm, very focused. Coming back to what you said, you brought up some very interesting points. So, you spoke about social desirability. So, this is something that came up in my mind when I was reading the book. Like, do you think the book, or the answers that these men gave you, or basically the answers to the questions, would have been very different had a man been asking them these questions, or had a man written the book?
There was just this one subject from Mumbai who, because Amit was staying with him in the hostel, Amit was able to develop a much deeper camaraderie with him than I was. Even though this chap lived in Bombay, in a city that I am comfortable with. It's my city. I felt that a lot of the spaces that he was accessing were purely male. So I don't know whether that was the only reason he confided in Amit and not in me. But I also think that if there's a certain gender camaraderie that would have been built, it's a little different also because I came there seeking their dramatic life stories. So if they had something to say, it would have been said in that kind of scenario. I had 250 questions to ask, and I think I got everything that I set out to find.
So, can you tell us what were some of the questions, and how did you come up with those questions? And those questions were common, across the different, the men you interviewed as well. So, why was that?
So the questions were based on all of the reading that I had done. If I was looking at understanding stuff about caste, I'd ask about caste. Some of it was generic history of your family. Where did you come from? How did your parents meet? What does caste play in your life? What do you think about men and women? A lot of the men don't see themselves as rapists or men who rape. They just see themselves as regular men. So a lot of the questions that I ended up asking were casually about stuff that I consider rape, and an evolved understanding of rape, it's considered rape. But in a layperson's idea, that's not rape. So a lot of the men would answer questions about, has there been times where your wife has said no and you've done it anyway? And it's very casually put. And sure enough, the answer is yes, of course. She's always saying no, and I was feeling it. So but then if you ask them, do you think you've raped, or are you a rapist? Even though what they have just described is marital rape, they'll say no. So a lot of these questions were generic, first to find out their social cultural positioning and psychology, and then I think much deeper into the questionnaire towards the end, in fact, not in the beginning. But later on, say around day 4, is when I finally asked the big questions. Some men were very, very chatty and very happy to tell me everything I wanted to hear.
I think just the feeling of being interviewed makes someone feel special. So I can imagine, they really enjoyed the attention that you gave them, but also, just listening to your whole process. I mean, I just feel like I want to, get out of my seat and start researching about something. I mean, I know it sounds
Absolutely.
very superficial,
It does.
but
It
I
does.
don't mean, I don't, no, I don't mean it that way.
I feel the same. I feel the same way.
Yeah. I mean, it's so you get this adrenaline rush just from listening to that. Tara, I can't even imagine how exciting it was. I mean, exciting might be the wrong
No,
word in
it's
this
the right
context, but then
word. It's the right word.
okay, okay,
Like while
okay. But
I was
yeah,
in it, it was super exciting. But after, I was like, oh my God.
I mean, it took you 7 years to research and come up with the final version. So, I was wondering, because as a writer myself, I understand when you get completely caught up with the project and when you know it's going well, you almost forget to do everything else in your life. So I wanted to know, how did you de-stress, or did you do anything else to, divert your mind, to keep you going, or basically cope with the heaviness of the subject?
So I think that I lost myself in my book. And I think the one thing that I really have to thank my family for, and I'm not only talking about my natal family, but also my in laws, is for just like beyond a point letting me be. I wouldn't show up for family functions. Whereas Tara, she's in her cave writing. I would not emerge for days and weeks and months on end. And I think that was my process. The thing that kept me going, for one, the first and foremost is Sahil, because he not only gave me space when I needed it, but whatever else I needed. Maybe today I really need to go dancing, and he'd be like, okay, let's go dancing. And baby, can you read my draft? And it was, okay, cool, let's read your draft. So
Oh, so sweet.
everything I wanted.
That just warms my heart.
really when I wanted it. So it was like, okay, don't speak to me for 3 weeks. But when I emerge, like, because I have emerged right now, drop everything and let's do this because I want to do this. And he'd be like, okay, cool, like, let's do this. So he was really great. My friends have been phenomenal. Not only did they give me space, but they also gave me everything I needed, from massages, feed me, or I want to go dancing. And there was music and my dogs and the lovely Gold Coast where I wrote my book.
But it's so beautiful that when you were saying all of this, I was like, wow, that's so lucky, and that's something that we've heard from a lot of writers, is that support system really means a lot. So very happy for you. And how would you say that this whole process has changed you as a person in the last 7 years, from when you started out to now?
I feel a lot more intelligent than that I was, right? And I think that I hate saying this, but this is what I mean. I feel that I have gained subject matter expertise like I have that I didn't have before. And I have to thank my friend Jake for this, because just before I took on this project full time, I was considering taking another, media consultancy job to ensure that I had enough money to do this book. And Jake said to me, he said, you learn what you surround yourself with. And for 7 years now, I do feel that I know what I'm talking about. There is imposter syndrome, of course, all the time. But like, I do feel that I have earned my stripes when I talk about gender violence now. The other thing that I feel has changed in a positive way for me is this sense that I no longer second guess my writing. Again, talking about imposter syndrome and in general, having a bit of fear about your own work of art. I've written for years, and people would write to me saying, your work is great. And everyone would tell me my work is great, but there was a huge gap between my sense of my own work and what other people were saying. But last year, sometime, I had this conversation with my editor at HarperCollins. She's actually editing my second book, not this one. But she spent about 2 hours on the phone just going on and on about the book proposal that my co-author and I had sent her. And she just went on like it was unadulterated praise. And something in me shifted at that point, where I was like, I remember telling Soumya, we were screaming and so excited. And I remember telling her, oh, our writing is as great as we think it is, so stop. We need to just like get over our imposter syndrome.
It's very relatable what you're saying, because I feel like all of us at some point, have felt imposter syndrome. I certainly have felt it, many times. And even in this podcast, interviewing such amazing authors doing amazing things, sometimes like, why am I in this position to do that?
And so your next book, I mean, you are co-writing it with another writer. So does that actually help, with the imposter syndrome? And what is the experience like? Because your first project, it was, though it was reliant on other stories and, heavily research driven. I mean, you were the author, at the end of the day. But now that you're co-writing it, what is the experience like?
Second book is about, and I really know how to pick them, don't I? But the second book is about the true case of a rape and murder that happened in Agra 7.5 years ago. This PhD scholar called Neha Sharma was raped and murdered on the 15th of March 2013. And Soumya Rajaram, who is a journalist and my closest friend and a really senior journalist, actually, Soumya and I are writing this book together. It's been a very interesting experience. And both of us know that this book would not be this book if it wasn't for the fact that both of us were doing it together. Because A, it would take me a lot more time. B, it's a very, very complicated book. I also made the mistake of saying that, Why Men Rape was such a complicated book with so many narratives and structural issues and stuff, that I made the mistake of saying that, no matter what book I do next, it will be easier than this book. And that was my first thing. I'm like, Jo bhi hai, it's going to be easier than this. I was in for a very rude surprise because
Yeah, it doesn't get easier.
no, I'll tell you what,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I realized that some of the challenges that were inherent in Why Men Rape don't exist or don't apply for this other book. But other challenges come up. For instance, even following the media, simple things like the media coverage, which has been very extensive for this case, I would say 98% of it is Hindi. So, what was not a factor when I did Why Men Rape is suddenly a really big chunk of time and a big factor in this one, where I'm having to, look at Hindi coverage. And my Hindi is not great at the best of times. When people co author, maybe one of the ways that people usually do it is somebody researches and somebody writes. But here, both of us are writing. So, finding out how to divide our spaces, not to overlap work, these are new challenges. And I think we're just finding our way around it. And the bottom line for us is that, we come to this from a place of trust and friendship and love. So, we haven't really had any disagreements so far. It's been quite cool.
And that is very tempting. So I, immediately thought of Tara. And Tara, I would love to co-write a book with you.
It sounds awesome. Yeah, I mean, what you said makes sense because you need a partner that you trust and that you work well with. So I think that's a good idea.
And I'd be really happy to give you any tips and tricks you want on how to
Oh,
work
that's
with that.
amazing. That's
That
fantastic.
would be great. So yeah, Tara, that brings us to our question. Like, did you read any non-fiction books that changed the way you saw journalism? And do you read, certain books just for pleasure? Like, I mean, this is a book question.
Change the way I saw journalism? Not really, no, but certainly changed the way I saw my subject matter. Yes, there are several books that I would call essential reading when you talk about gender and violence. So there's Kate Mann's book. She's a feminist philosopher who I greatly admire. She wrote this book called Down Girl: The Logic of Misogyny. Then there's Professor Paul Bloom's book, which is called Against Empathy, which I found very, very interesting again. In India, I found this book called Too Many Men, Too Few Women, which is edited by somebody called Ravinder Kaur. I found that very illuminating about, what's happening with India in the sense that, the consequences of female feticide and the gender imbalance that we have, and how that's actually negatively impacting women and men on the ground. But when you talk about other books that I read for pleasure, I love fiction. That's my thing. And when I read fiction, I like the post-colonial style. I think it's way more nuanced than say a classic like even an Oliver Twist, or even Pride and Prejudice that I absolutely love, and it's my go-to like chick literature. Even if I look at all of those, even the ones that I like, versus the nuances of post-colonial writing, whether it's Marquez or Arundhati Roy or Vikram Seth or Salman Rushdie, I really much prefer post-colonial writing.
Lot of recommendations, and I love that you mentioned your chicklet is Pride and Prejudice.
It
Yes.
is. It is, right? I mean, it is chicklet. Come
It
on.
is. I completely agree with you. Chicklet just has a very bad rep. But that's another topic. So to end, we have a small rapid fire section.
Oh, shit.
The first question is 3 female journalists you admire.
Oh my God. Faye Rana Barkha.
Wow, that was really rapid. I think the most rapid answer ever on our
There's
podcast.
no two ways about it. Faye
So
is
cool.
next level. Anyway, go on. Next.
Okay, yeah. So self-publishing versus traditional publishing.
Listen, this is a really complicated answer. I've gone for traditional publishing, but I have a really long reason. So no, traditional for now. Rapid fire. Okay, traditional.
Yes.
Okay, so if you woke up as a man tomorrow, what is the first thing you would do?
I'd change my bio to feminist on everything that I owned. Like on every Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, I'd just be like feminist man. Because I really think the feminist man or feminist allies play a huge role.
Love it.
That one song that you dance to, that you can dance to any time of the day.
Yeah, there's this soundtrack by this Delhi-based artist called Lifafa. It's a set that he played on this radio channel called Red Light Radio. I listened to it on loop to finish the book. Like I just put it on and I'd listen to it 8 times a day. It was insane. But yeah, that's currently and continues to be a very important track for me.
What is that one piece of advice you would give to women, whoever they may be, trying to raise their voice against issues in India? I know it's a loaded one, but in brief.
Just do it, I mean, I'm the kind of feminist who believes that all our traditional systems need to be uprooted and changed, burnt down and changed if need be. And just do it. And I know that there's a lot of familial pushback, and families tend to be the biggest arbitrators of society and patriarchy and honor and all of these things. So families are actually the biggest fight for us. It's okay if the pados wali auntie says something, but it's harder when it's your families. But I'd say just push back as much as you can. There is solidarity available online. There's a feminist sisterhood, but push back and just do it is my advice.
Yeah, and just do it, I think, even applies for writing itself. So yesterday someone asked me, how do you deal with writer's block? I said, just write. there's no way around it. So I have a last question for you. Who is your biggest source of inspiration?
Oh, I love Oprah.
Nice one.
I do. People can say she's all this pop psychology and stuff, but for a Black woman to be at the top of the game in America when she did it is a huge deal.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm a fan of Oprah too, and I loved her interview with J.K. Rowling. So thank you so much, Tara, for being here today. I think, both Michelle and I got so many insights about, journalism, about writing a book, about the research process, and so much else. So this was absolutely fantastic. I think the highlight of my week, if I must say so.
I'm so glad we spoke to her, Tara, because we always wanted to know what it takes to actually have the courage and go out there and ask those difficult questions and then even write about it, because it's not easy, but she did it and she is truly an inspiration. I'm so glad that we spoke to her. Now, on our next episode, we will be talking to each other, which is a very special episode and our final episode of season 2. So Tara and I will be talking about books, which is our favorite topic, absolute favorite topic in the world. We will be talking about reading habits, how our reading habits have evolved during the pandemic, and reading habits in general. So why do people read Arundhati Roy, or why do people read Chetan Bhagat? Why do people pick up books? For what reasons? Does a book cover influence them? Does a review influence them? So we are also going to be covering fake reviews and so many more interesting things. So please do find us.
Follow us on Bound Podcast and at Bound India on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.
So until next time.